Welcome to Reggie's World, the podcast that everybody's talking about with Yellow Boy, Reggie Reg. Yeah, you know, the guy you grew up with on the radio in Detroit. And I'm so excited because on today's program, I have a sister that I am just so proud of, and I know you are. If you don't know about her, you're about to know about it, and you will be proud of her. I always talk about how God's greatest creation is the black woman. I talk about that all the time because it is a fact. It is a matter of complete fact. I ain't lying. I ain't playing with you. It's a real deal. We are the dominant, and the woman, the black woman, is God's greatest creation. And when you talk to God, you ask him, and he's going to tell you the black woman is God's greatest creation. So on today's program, I have a sister from my town, my hometown, Detroit, Michigan, from the east side. And for those of you who know the city of Detroit, the east side is the best side. Some of y'all get it twisted talking about the west side, but it's the east side. She's from the east side. You don't forget where you come from. We all come from over on the east side of Detroit. Joe Lewis and the Mayor Coleman Young, Buddy Battle, the Union Guys, and many other great names are from the east side of Detroit. And that's where she and her family are from. And her father was a Detroit police officer. In Detroit, he wore a badge and a gun, and he represented law enforcement, protecting people on the city streets of Detroit. And she was just a baby, and he was assassinated while doing his work as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer. And we always talk about how the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Well, this is a great scenario, case in point, this young lady's story, because her father was a police officer, and she barely knew him because he died when she was just a little bitty baby. Yet she decided to take that piece that her father displayed for her. She took it and ran with it. And today, if you look at her resume, her repertoire, if you look at her line of work, well, what you'll see is Dallas police chief. Yeah, the first black woman to hold that position, Dallas police chief. That's just one of them. There's many others we're going to talk about, but that's one of the greatest pieces that I tell you, this sister, you know, let me stop, and let me bring her on. And then, fellas, I'm going to tell you, too, she's beautiful all around, 1,000%. The inside, her mind, her body, and her soul. So she's beautiful too. But some of you fellas, listen, when you see this, because you're listening to us on ReggieRegRadio.com, but you can go to our website at ReggieRegRadio.com, and you can click on that little page that does our podcast, and you can pull her up. And I'm gonna tell you, she's a beautiful sister. So listen, fellas, do not be trying to ask for her number. Listen to the sister's story, sit back and relax. All right, and then teach your daughters about what this sister knows so that they can be a success story just like her. So let me go ahead and bring her on. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, all my cousins, I want y'all to put y'all hands together for Police Chief Renee Hall. Yeah. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you, Reggie. Happy holidays, and thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Always good to have you. And I love those glasses. And look at you, looking like a model. So you show your police. All right, well, you're a police chief or a model?
So we got specs these days.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So listen, what we want to do is of course to tell your story, because on this network, the parent company is Grown Folks Radio, and what we talk about is telling your story. Stand up. And let us know, because we can always learn from storytelling. And you have one hell of a story. But before we start your story, Police Chief Renee Hall, I gotta take care of some business, because I want everybody who is listening to this program, Reggie's World, to understand what this here is really all about. The views and opinions of Reggie's World podcast are absolutely positively those of Grown Folks Radio Network, the parent company, the Express Yourself Network. And due to the fact that we are broadcasting via internet radio and not the antiquated terrestrial radio broadcasting method, I can say what the hell I want to say without a program director who really does not care what the hell I say. But due to the fact that he works for a gigantic corporate radio group that really doesn't give a damn about the concerns that need to be addressed in my community, but they are instead standing on pins and needles with the FCC. So he tells me to refrain from being me by having a very strong opinion about any and every damn thing I wish to have a strong opinion about, followed by a threat to reprimand me if I continue to be my individual human self by standing up for my absolute constitutional right to express myself through freedom of speech, which is a strong part of this nation's law of the land, instead of just simply allowing a brother to express himself. Well, for clarification, I am here on Reggie's World to speak as freely and as genuinely as I fucking please. Because as the title says, this is my world. So if you have a problem with me expressing my viewpoint on life's issues, then here's my recommendation for you, dear cousin. Turn me off. Turn me the hell off. And that there concludes this disclaimer. I'm just saying. All right, now that we have a better understanding of what this is all about here, Chief Renee Hall, welcome again to the program. Glad to have you here and good to see you.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Always happy to be a part of what's going on in the D. And congratulations to you about being your own boss. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
Proud
Thank you, sister. Thank you, Sister Hall. So let's get started with your story. I talked about your father because every time you tell your story, that's where it starts at. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, especially in our community. That's a great thing to have someone like your father to lead you, and then you take what he put out and you took it to an entirely other great level. So tell us the story about your father as a Detroit police officer.
Well, thank you, Reggie. One, thank you for giving me this platform always to talk about law enforcement and the other side of it. I know when we talk about law enforcement as a whole, there's so many people who there's a dichotomy. If you're Black in law enforcement and you support law enforcement, then you're not Black enough for Black Lives Matter. If you don't support the cultural existence of those things that have plagued law enforcement and given us a broken relationship in law and with our community, then you're not supportive of law enforcement enough. So it's always an opportunity to set the record straight, on radio, television, or in print. So just want to say I am a second generation law enforcement officer. My father was a police officer. He was working vice in the city of Detroit in 1971. I was 6 months old and he was killed. The interesting thing about my father's murder, it was never solved. And to this day, it is still an open case. It's a cold case. And so we have no idea what happened to him. And it was those things. I never wanted to be the police, but I can tell you, my father's story is the journey, but it was the mother that I had. And you met my mom, who instilled in me that if you want to make a difference, you have to be a part of the solution. And so although law enforcement wasn't my dream, it happened to be the path that God chose for me. And it was having a father's murder that was never solved, understanding the need for closure, and understanding that there needed to be a healthier relationship between law enforcement and the community to get the answers that you need when something happens in your community. I took that. I can tell you when I chose law enforcement, well, law enforcement chose me. It was my mentor and friend, and God rest his soul, Benny Napoleon. I was sitting in graduate school. I had finished a criminal justice degree at Grambling State University and went to grad school, was supposed to get a master's/law degree. And he talked me into joining the police department and joined the Detroit Police Department, matriculated all the way through to the rank of deputy chief. I had some great mentors, not just Benny, but he was truly the most instrumental. Chief Godby, Chief Craig. There were so many individuals who played a role in my life and contributed to me being the first woman to ever hold a position as chief of police in the city of Dallas. Before I got there, they had never had a woman in that role. And I can tell you, as a Black woman, and you started your show with Black women, we represent only 12% of the 800,000 members in law enforcement. We're only 12%. And when you talk about Black women, that percentage gets even smaller. Talk about Black women leading police agencies, we're less than a percentage point, and it's very challenging for us, and they give us a very hard time, but we keep kicking behind and taking names, and we're continuing to go through, because what has to change is the relationship between law enforcement and the community. And so my journey took a lot of turns. There were individuals who were influential, like yourself. You've always been very supportive of me in law enforcement, called me on the carpet when you thought that law enforcement was not living up to the level of integrity that we possess and we're supposed to stand for, and always being a voice and always being able to hear. And so I just thank you for that, and I just say that God has been a true blessing to me. I am no longer the chief of police. I am living in the city of DC, where I'm a law enforcement consultant, and headed to Harvard University as a fellow, and we'll be doing some guest lecturing as well as part of my journey around police reform and African Americans and poverty and law enforcement, and why we continue to be at the forefront of law enforcement and the challenges. And so I'm just excited about where God is taking me on this journey. And I thank all of my supportive individuals who may be listening to the radio in Detroit, because you guys have been absolutely amazing in supporting and lifting me up, as that journey has been extremely challenging. So thank you, and God bless.
And I'm gonna mess with you through this entire piece about how you should be the police chief in Detroit. Nothing against Chief White and Chief Craig. You did your thing, and White, you my boy. But this sister needs to be. Listen, this is Detroit. I'm in Detroit, and we're still the biggest Black. I mean, you got DC, which is you be chocolate city. That's fine, but Detroit's still the biggest Black city. 77% of black people live in this city, and for us to have a sister, okay, who can run. I mean, Ella Bully Cummings, she did her thing, but you being from this city of Detroit and police chief in Dallas, and you turned that city out. We're about to talk about that in a minute. We're also going to talk about, like you say, your fellowship, things you're going to be doing at Harvard. Definitely got to touch on that, but let's go and let's stay in Detroit. You in Detroit, you were a deputy Detroit police chief, and that was under James Craig, correct? Chief Craig.
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
and during your time with Craig, I remember every time I turned on the TV, Sister Renee Hall, I'm calling you police chief because I want to call you police chief, Renee Hall. You had, every time I saw you on TV, you were doing something that had to do with police and community, and that was your baby. So talk about how that's just so you mentioned that earlier, how that's so important to you to put the police and the community together and build a great relationship between those two.
Well, Reggie, from the beginning, policing was created. It was never created to do by ourselves. As brilliant as we are, you can look at whether it's my resume, Chief Craig's resume, Chief White's resume, all the accolades, all the education, the degrees. We have never been able to solve a crime by ourselves. It's always the information that is provided by the community. I started this conversation by saying my father was murdered. Someone knows something. But whatever the relationship, and we can go back to the 70s, it was very few African Americans on the police department at that time. And so the African American community and the police department had a very tumultuous relationship. So, when those relationships are in disarray, who's going to provide the information that you need? So my journey has always been to make sure that those relationships were repaired, for us to do what we have not done a great job of, and that is own when we make a mistake or we're wrong, because historically we've done some things that challenge the relationship. We have shot and killed unarmed Black men, not just in 2020, but in 2019, 18, even back to 1960. That's the whole reason why we were rioting in the city of Detroit to begin with, was because of how we treated our community. And that has continued. So in order for us to move forward, we have to acknowledge it, we have to own it, we have to fix it, and we have to move forward. We have to make sure that the community is a part of the police department, make sure that they have a voice, that they have a seat at the table, that when we make decisions, they are part of that decision. You don't want anyone making a decision in your life that they don't come to you and include you in that process. And neither does our communities that we serve. So giving them a voice, making sure that we have a great relationship. And that means going to community meetings when we're wrong. And when they're calling us on the carpet and saying, you did X, Y, and Z, and we said we did. And here's how we're going to fix it. But we're going to need your help. What do you want to see in this community? So taking that premise and running with it. My sister and I were talking about one of the programs I created while I was in Detroit. Well, two. I had a C2Y, Community to Youth, where we had a mentorship partnership with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and that is putting police officers in the lives of young individuals who had parents that were incarcerated, because we recognize the statistics that if your parents have been incarcerated, one or both, the likelihood of your incarceration increases. So if we could partner you with law enforcement to show you the other side, to provide some insight and some mentoring and coaching in your life, we can dispel those myths, and not myths, but dispel those odds. And so that was one program. And then the second one, when I was a deputy chief, was to be able to create an opportunity for those individuals being hired into the police department. We recognize that some individuals who join the police department have never had encounters with Black people. The majority of law enforcement is white male. It's 80%, 80+% male throughout the entire country. And even throughout the country, it's still more than 67, 68% white male. And so we understand that sometimes you've never had an encounter with a Black person. So here's what we're going to do. I created a week-long requirement. When you graduate from the academy, you need to spend a day feeding at the Capuchin Kitchen. And that was because you needed to understand that it wasn't just individuals who were homeless that was at the kitchen. There was a working poor. There were individuals who had to make the decision between paying bills and buying food, that you were policing, and you needed to know that everything that we did impacted them. That means if you wrote them several tickets for one infraction, they were not going to be able to pay those, which creates a plethora of other issues in their lives. And another responsibility was to sit down with the formerly incarcerated. There was a program that when they wanted to be reintegrated into the community, they had to go through all of these steps. And our officers needed to understand, when you run across an individual with a SID number, does not mean that individual is up to no good. Maybe they're trying to get a job, because we all know that when you return from prison, there's not a lot of companies lining up to hire you. So you're trying to get back on your feet. And if we in law enforcement continue to come in contact with you and lock you up for the smallest things, we're contributing to a continuous process that has a no-win situation at the end of it. So understanding your community and who you are policing was so important to me. And what I found is that it made a tremendous difference of how we police our communities and the level of empathy that we had when we are running into these individuals. So I'm proud of those. Simon Shakette, actually, I want to say a shout out to him. He actually did an interview with me regarding the program and my father to highlight that. And I think it was those things that I was doing in the city around community policing and community engagement that landed me in the city of Dallas. So I'm thankful for all of that.
You're listening to Reggie's World, a podcast on ReggieRegRadio.com. And if you want to see this, just go to our website, ReggieRegRadio.com, and hit the podcast page. Look for Chief Renee Hall, and you can pull it up on demand and see this story over and over and over again. And I'm sure you're going to enjoy it every time you see it, because she's always a pleasure to hear from. Sister Renee Hall, in the city of Detroit, you recall my baby brother Vito, who lost his life to gun violence at the tender age of 19. He's a good kid. He graduated from Denby High School, had a scholarship to Eastern Michigan playing basketball. And one late night on the east side of Detroit, 5 young men between the ages of 13 and 19 who didn't have a father or an older brother to steer them in the right direction like my brother Vito did. And they robbed him because he had the things that he should have because he was doing the things he was supposed to do, and they ended up taking his life. So you know that story. The city of Detroit, again, being the biggest the black city in this country, Detroit is the mecca of black America. It just is. I don't care what anybody says. And when you look at gun violence in a city like Detroit, and you being here, being a part of fighting that senseless gun violence, trying to figure out the answer to it, and you go down to Dallas as the police chief in Dallas. Now Dallas, I think it was 24% black in the city of Dallas, something to that effect. It's not 77 like Detroit,
27. It was 27, 28.
Okay, 27% black folk in the city of Dallas. Okay, so you're there, you're the chief, and I read that while you were the police chief, the city of Dallas saw a nearly 6% reduction in overall crime. Now, I don't know how much of that is gun violence, but I'm sure you do. How is it that we can make something as such or something similar to what you did in Dallas happening in the city of Detroit?
So I really want to say thank you for those stats, because, as police chiefs, we don't always get credit for the things that actually happen. But I want to say that crime was reduced at some times and it increased in others. And what I will have on this conversation, much like you want to have real conversations, I'm going to have a real conversation about police chiefs and law enforcement. No single person has the ability to impact gun violence. Violence in this country is cyclical. And there are so many facets of it because gun violence is not just about how many police officers you put on the street or who you put in the police chief's seat. There is a socioeconomic portion that is tied to gun violence, and it always has. There's studies from Harvard, there's studies from Princeton, and everyone will tell you that the socioeconomics that are tied to your city is going to be tied to the violence and the gun violence in your particular communities. When we look across this country, whether it's Chicago, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, Dallas, when you look at the homicide rate and the non-fatal shooting rates and who's committing these crimes, more than 80 to 90% of them is Black on Black. And those are the places that we have to start. Why is violence so prevalent in the Black community everywhere in the United States? And why are guns so accessible in this country? So when you tackle those two things, that is when you come up with a recipe to reduce gun violence. What this country has allowed us to do as it relates to police chiefs is say, here's a police chief and you had 192 people murdered. We got another police chief. Now we got only 190 murders. Now you're a better police chief. So you mean to tell me two less, 4 less, 5 less murders makes you a better police chief? You have no control over that number of individuals. What we are missing is there's still more than 100, 200, 300 murders in the city, and we're dealing with whether it's 1 less, 2 less, 3 less, or 5 less. And all of that, we've missed the point. What we recognize is those individuals who are impoverished. When you have to make a decision between whether you're going to have lights, gas, water, and heat and food, what are your options? What are your options? I take my hat off to 50 Cent, but there is an individual who went to Grambling with me who's doing BWF and the movie Black Mafia Family out of the city of Detroit, and Randy Huggins. And, we went to Grambling together and they're doing a fantastic job. But there is one portion in this movie that is very important. It's when Meech and Terry are going back and forth about their parents losing their home and them out selling drugs. And Meech pays the bills while he's making all this drug money. And Terry says, I told you you should not have paid the bill. And he says, so we're going to be a homeless family and righteous. And these are the kind of decisions that individuals have to make every day in the Black community when you have no job, no education, no training. And I am in no way sitting here as a police chief telling you that some of this is not due to some of the choices that individuals make. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying to you is that if you make a choice on crime and you go to prison, when you come home, in order for you not to go back to prison or in order for you not to choose a life of crime, there has to be resources, education, and training in place for you to make better decisions. Because if someone has to choose between eating, being able to have a place to stay, and selling drugs and violent crime is going to win out every single time, because we are creatures of survival. And that is how people survive. So until our country decides that they want to tackle those issues and deal with the socioeconomics that plague these Black communities, we are always going to be in this situation. And here's again, I will preface this by saying again that I am not excusing choices that we make in our lives. But even those choices, once they have consequences, after you've paid your debt to society, can you choose to have a better life? Have we as a country created an opportunity to give you a better selection at life? And that's how we deal with violent crime in our cities.
Yeah, and Chief, anyway, because everything you said, you went right around that socioeconomic. Okay, is it racism or is it socioeconomic? I get it. So we're going to touch on that critical race theory in a moment. But I want to stay with your expertise in, if I might say, the community policing. So we talk about violent crime, we talk about gun violence. In the city of Detroit, lost my kid brother, and many people in the city of Detroit that I know have lost loved ones to senseless gun violence. Can you tie those into each other? How gun violence continues to happen because the police and the community don't have as strong of a relationship as they should have, Chief?
Absolutely. And we talk about this. And I've said earlier, when you don't have a relationship with your community and something happens, who do you go to get the information? Unless we have cameras, unless we have, some sort of recording in the area when something happens, we rely on the people who live, work, and play in these neighborhoods to provide us the information. When I tell you, growing up in the city of Detroit on the east side, Miss Brown, Mr. Dale, Miss Harris, those were the individuals that watched out for your house. When we left home in the hood, and we wanted to go to Belle Isle, you would raise up the windows and leave the windows wide open so the house could air out and get all the fresh sunlight and all the fresh air, and your neighbors watched out for your house. I can remember my mom taking all of us to Belle Isle. We're coming back home, and our neighbor down the street, she was like, there was a black car that pulled up, license plate 123 ABC. I had never seen him before, but he was out. He got out, knocked on the door.
Right.
They know this is your community. And so the premise to that is that if something had happened to the house while we were gone, Miss Mary or Miss Harris saw the car and they were able to provide us with the information. Well, that is what law enforcement and the community has. Because when there's a shooting on the block, when there's a robbery, when there's burglaries, when there's carjackings, somebody saw it. But if I don't have a good relationship with you, I'm not sharing anything, because there's trust. And trust is at the root of all of this. If I don't trust you, I don't trust you with the information. I don't trust that you're going to protect me in the long run. And so I'm not providing that level of information. So what we have to do is we have to continue to build trust, to be transparent. And I can't trust you if the only thing you want to do is expose what I do. But when something happens in a police department, you never tell us what's going on. You're not transparent. So the transparency has to be both ways. We have to be truthful about what happens inside the police department, so that when something happens outside of the police department, that we're handling you the same way we're handling our own. So those are the kinds of things that contribute to being able to solve these crimes. When I talk about the socioeconomic, I'm talking about the things that contribute to the crime. But in order to bring those individuals responsible to justice, to be able to solve those crimes, we have to have the kind of relationship with our community that they understand that we have a level of integrity that is beyond reproach. Our peace can't be breached, and that we are here for them. We're going to be transparent with them. We need them, and we're working side by side, and we're partners. It's like a marriage. we need one another. There is no 50-50. There's 100-100, and we both have to be all in for this thing in order for it to work.
Yeah, I hear that. Incredible story. Police Chief Renee Hall is on the line with me right now. You're listening to Reggie's World, the podcast on ReggieRegRadio.com. And so, Sister Renee Hall, you're in Detroit. You come up in law enforcement. Brother Benny Napoleon, rest in peace, county sheriff. He was also police chief, and he did a line of things in the order of law enforcement in the city of Detroit. We all know and love Benny Napoleon very well. You came up under his tutelage. Also, you worked under Chief James Craig, Chief Ralph Godby. And then, okay, so now let's go from Detroit, Sister Renee Hall, and let's go on down to Dallas. And before we leave, if I don't forget, you're going to have to tell us which D is the real D. Is it Dallas or Detroit?
It's Detroit.
I had an argument.
Let me say this. I have 3 D's under my belt. I started in Detroit, I went to Dallas, and I now live in DC. And let me tell you, Detroit is it. Now, I got 3D effect, but I am partial to Detroit. It is the D. It is the D. So let's be clear.
I keep telling you, every time I run into somebody from Dallas, they're talking about, now we the D, we the big D, we the D. Okay, whatever. Detroit is where it's at. And Chief Renee Hall just broke it down for you. Okay, so now, so you leave Detroit and you get, you are part of these cats that even Ella Bully, when she was around, for small time she was under Kwame Kilpatrick, you had a chance to, get to know her, work with her. But so then you come down to Dallas, Sister Renee Hall, and you are put in the position of the top dog, the top one, the chief of police in Dallas, Texas. And looking at your accomplishments there, I have a few, and I know you can only give that back to the Benny Napoleons and the James Craig, Ralph Godby, etc. During your time as chief in Dallas, Sister Renee Hall, of course, we said that city saw a nearly 6% reduction in overall crime in your second year there, 2018. You put together Real-Time Crime Center, Dallas online reporting system. I couldn't believe that you couldn't text 911 until you came down there. So, break that down. Talk about those accomplishments as police chief in Dallas, Texas, and also what were some of your other accomplishments as Dallas police chief?
So one of the things that was definitely surprising to me is that Dallas is the 9th largest city in the United States of America. And when I arrived, we had no technology. So, when you look at 21st century policing, you understand that in order to be transparent, you have to be able to give that information to your community. And so the days of writing things down or inputting in an Excel spreadsheet that you can't share should have been, obsolete, but they weren't. So coming in, making sure that the police department had a up-to-date technology. As you said, texting, we couldn't even do police reports online until I arrived.
Wow.
So, those were the kinds of things that, helped us as a police department reduce our response time, because if officers didn't have to go out to take a report and a resident could do a police report online, we could utilize those officers for other things and also reduce our response time. So those were some of the things, some of the accomplishments that we made. The Real-Time Crime Center. When I arrived, we did not have a real-time crime center, and the technology and the analytics to be able to, read license plate readers and things like that. Also
Dallas, as big as that city is, they didn't have that.
There was a lot, and I think the myth is that the larger you are, the bigger you are. But I mean, and the better you are, and the more technology and all the bells and whistles you have, and that's not necessarily true. I will say this, and it probably will, not set well with individuals, but the cities that have the best 21st century policing in place are those cities that have had Department of Justice consent decrees. And I say that because the Department of Justice comes in and it is all about the community and the police and being able to have a transparent police department with all the up-to-date technologies, management awareness systems that allow police agencies to be able to see what each officer is doing, how frequently, so that you can detect any challenges in your law enforcement agency before the community has to be impacted by that. So it was those things that, and one of management and awareness system was one of the things that I started, while there. Also, one of the biggest things is that we talk about community policing. In the city of Dallas, the relationship between police and the Black community and the Latino community was very tumultuous. And so they had been trying for more than 30 years to get a police oversight board. Well, it was my leadership and me standing out in front alongside of the activists, ensuring that we received an oversight board that was able to look into the actions of the police department. And I can be honest with you, that did not set well with the associations, or we have unions in Detroit, but in the city of Dallas, they have associations. It didn't sit well initially with the associations and the members of the police department, because they felt like that somehow you didn't support law enforcement. But my premise is, I believe in law enforcement. I trust what we do, especially under my leadership. And I believe if we're doing the right thing, if we're not doing anything wrong, and if we're holding individuals accountable for any wrong that's being done, the community has a right to have a bird's eye view into that, to see exactly what's happening, because that is the only thing that builds trust and legitimacy. If we do not have those things, we do not have anything. Every time something happens in a police department and we have activists marching and all these protests, we're just chasing our tails. We have to be able to say, here's what happened, here, look and see, and either we did it all right, or you have some recommendations as how we can do things differently. So it was those kinds of things, and also meeting with the community and the activists on a regular basis and changing some of the general orders that they wanted. One of the things that we did not have in place as a city is when an individual, one of our officers, got into a shooting, there was no drug testing. Now we drug test, I'm sorry, there was no alcohol and drug testing. We alcohol and drug test when they get into a car wreck, but we didn't do it when they got into a shooting. And the activists wanted that. Mothers Against Police Brutality asked for that, wanted that. It was reasonable. And so we gave that to them. And it was those kinds of changes that we made. When we saw an increase in violent crime, one of the things I came up under the most fire for is when I started talking about the socioeconomics, and that the city needed to do some additional things outside of law enforcement to be able to deal with the crime and violence that was taking place, but also creating a violent crime plan in 2020, that it sought to reduce crime. And we saw the reductions. Wasn't the ones that we wanted, but I can tell you the current police chief who's there right now built upon that crime plan. That's almost the exact same crime plan with a few tweaks that we use. And it was starting to prove successful, and it's proving successful. But none of this took place. None of our ability to be successful in the city of Dallas happened without the input of the community and them working alongside of us and being our eyes and ears. One of the other things that I created along with my team while being in Dallas was we talk about mentors, Chief Craig with the Green Light program. We started the Starlight program. It was just a spinoff of the Green Light, because we recognize that when you have a video surveillance, it's a deterrent. Individuals are less likely to commit a crime if they know that they're captured on video, and their chances of being arrested are increased. So those are some of the things that I started and was able to accomplish that led to successes in the city of Dallas. So I'm proud of that, and excited to be on to my next journey.
Absolutely, and we're very happy for you. So let's make our way on the way down that little road towards critical race theory. Let's start here. This is the thick of everything. Police reform. Black and blue, Sister Renee Hall. You as a Black woman, your police chief. You got to talk about the dividing line between Black and blue. Now, you talked about it many times. I saw you on TV doing interviews on major networks, NBC, CBS, and all of them. And, people in the Black community really want to know. I always look at it like this. You got Harriet Tubman, way back in the day. As you and I know, she led the Black slaves to all the way up to the north, Canada, Detroit, from the South, because they want to get away from all that, crazy, shackle me up and pick the cotton. And so they wanted freedom, right? So this was a black woman who had a railroad, in a sense, to guide black folk to freedom. And the one thing, Sister Renee Hall, that they were trying to avoid was, during that time, that level of what we call police or law enforcement. So we come to today's age, and it ain't no different. Black people, you see it every day. George Floyd, ding, ding. A black man who had his neck, a white officer put his knee into his brother's neck until he couldn't, his life escaped his body. We know the story. So when this happened, and in every city, including yours, Dallas, everybody's got all this violence that's going all around, the protests, the rioting. You know what happened, and so you were pushed into a position that put you in a real hot seat. If your seat wasn't hot before that, it was super hot when George Floyd happened, because we saw you on TV. So when we look at the two, the blue and the black, the blue is oftentimes known to destroy the black, and you know what I mean by that. So how do you separate the black and the blue? I mean, you led the protest. You were on the front lines down in Dallas. We saw you. You were the police chief on the front lines. How do you separate the black and the blue? We need to know.
So here's the thing. There is no separation. There's no way to separate black and blue. I'm a black woman, been black for 50 years, been a woman for 50 years, and I am blue. I am law enforcement. I am no longer an active law enforcement officer, but I've been in law enforcement for 23 years. So I don't need to separate anything. Our responsibility is to always do what is right. There is no separate. You cannot separate being a black woman in law enforcement and leading one of the top cities or the largest cities in the country. There's no way to separate that, and nor do I want to. Our responsibility is to do the right thing all the time. And that means that when the community is wrong, then we need to, as law enforcement, go in and make sure that we're making the proper arrest, that we're identifying the issues, but we're doing it with community policing in mind. Just because I have to arrest you doesn't mean I need to disrespect you. Just because I need to enforce the law in the community does not mean I need to do it so aggressively that I am, net dragging, dropping a net on everyone and riling up everybody. And so on the other side of that is being, inside the police department, is that when something happens, when we're wrong, when our officers shoot an unarmed individual, calling them on it. And when we, whether it's criminal activity or anything that is administrative, that we identify what that is without being labeled someone who is anti-police. Because what happens is, if I support the community, then I'm not law enforcement enough. And if I support the law enforcement, then I'm not community enough. And the truth of the matter, as a police chief, there were times when I supported the community, i.e. helped to create a oversight board because it needed to happen. And number two, making sure you fire police officers who commit, whether it's criminal activity or violates administrative policies and general orders in our police department that compromise the integrity of our organization. And so that is where the dichotomy comes in. And one of the biggest challenges is, when you're Black, the Black community expects you to be able to do something that they've been fighting for hundreds of years. And when you're on the inside, you're fighting the same fight. We talk about Dallas, but when I was appointed as the Dallas police chief, they were not happy. And I say they because there was a lot of individuals that weren't happy from the day that I was appointed. One, because I was a woman, and two, because I was Black. And that did not stop the entire time that I was there. So not only was I trying to fight, one, for law enforcement, to make sure that we were always represented well, because the officers that do the job every single day deserve to be respected. Every white person patrolling a neighborhood is not racist. That is unfair. And it just has no merit to it whatsoever. I've worked in law enforcement for 23 years. And I just did not see that I had white partners, Black partners, Hispanic, Arab, and I just did not see that. So it's unfair for them to have that reputation. And it was my responsibility as a chief to do everything within my power to make sure that people have no reason to give you that label, because we are transparent. We are handling our business both inside and outside of our agency, but also, for the community to allow them to understand that they are the primary responsibility also, and that we are committed to them, and they deserve a right to be upfront in our agency, but also when it's time to police violent crime in our communities, that's what we're going to do. We are going to allow individuals to be free from violence. People should not be fearful in their own communities where they pay taxes, where they live, and that is our responsibility. And sometimes the biggest challenge is doing both of those while keeping everybody happy. And the truth of the matter is, you're never going to make everybody happy. That's not your job. It wasn't my job in Dallas to make everybody happy. It was my job to ensure that the city was as safe as it could possibly be, and that our community was involved as it could possibly be, and that our officers had an environment to be able to work, live, and play in an area which allows for success for everyone.
So the protest happened, after George Floyd situation, and in Dallas, while you were police chief, you had protesters, out and about. They were throwing bricks at police horses. They threw bricks and rocks through police car windows. They were setting police cars on fire. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you came back and you had your officers use, you can correct me on this, rubber bullets. Now, and then after this, it says that you used the least amount of force. The mayor, the mayor in Dallas says that he didn't think you were doing enough. So if you used the least amount of force, why did the mayor and other city officials stand against you, Chief? Why? I don't get it.
So let me start by saying, I want to say that the Dallas police officers did an amazing job out there. They were under fire, much like you saw all across the country. Not only were people setting cars on fire, they were trapping my officers in the cars to try and set the cars on fire while they were there. And so there was a lot happening, and we were prepared as anyone could be. We had multiple law enforcement agencies working alongside of us. And we did everything that we could each and every day. But what we're not talking about is the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic. So on any given day, we had almost 200 officers who were out either quarantining, being with COVID. And so there were, plugs and holes and a lot of moving pieces. So we recognized that there were some things that we did. As it relates to us using the least amount of force, we recognized that lethal force was not something that we could use with large crowds. So we, like every other agency across the country, utilized the least amount of force to keep individuals, because the myth is that we had peaceful protesters. That is a myth. Were there some individuals peaceful? Yes, but the majority of these individuals were riotous. They were setting fires, and they were violent. And so we used the least amount of force, tear gas and or non-lethal projectiles, for us to be able to protect ourselves as the law enforcement agencies on the front line.
Question: is that non-lethal projectile? Is that a rubber bullet?
Those are, yes, rubber bullets, and they're actually not rubber bullets. They're rubber bean bags, and then pepper balls. So they're not bullets. They're bean bags. And so we had pepper balls, and those were the least amount of force that we could use to be able to protect ourselves, the community, and our property. And that property was not the priority, but it was definitely something that we needed to protect. When we talk about the elected officials, honestly, I have no respect for what I saw. I'm in Dallas from 2017 to 2020, watching mayors and city council members, fight to not give the Black community all the things that the Black community is asking for. But then during George Floyd, when a Black member of our society is killed by a law enforcement officer, now everybody's wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. So what I was subjected to was the politics of everybody's now on the Black bandwagon, and the chief of police has done some things that, I should have done. There's nothing that I did during that protest that I should not have done. Now, were some individuals injured? Absolutely. And that's never our goal. But we did what we had to do to protect ourselves. And now what you see from the mayor and city council members is backpedaling, because the black was the only thing you could be at this time, with Black Lives Matter at the forefront, and police was the enemy, and everybody jumped on the bandwagon, and so did my council, and so did my mayor. And these are things I haven't said in the past, but I will. We'll see in the book. But at the end of the day, the truth of the matter is, we did what we had to do, and we protected our city. We did not give up police stations. We did not, lose any members, and no lives were lost in our city. And so we are thankful for that, and we're thankful for that. At the end, that we had minimal damage, and we also didn't have any major catastrophes to our community as well. So it was not something we wanted to do. We had no desire going out that day, or any of the days, but it was the events that unfolded, and we used the tools that we had in our toolbox to be able to protect our community. Now, I'll also say this: we took an assessment after everything ended. We assessed the situation and saw that there were things that we could have done differently. And the things that we could have done differently, as a police chief, I instantly, changed some general orders to ensure that we, use projectiles, differently, that we use tear gas a little bit differently. But again, on those days, at that time, we did what we had to do as a police department. And I, take my hat off, and I commend and support the actions of the Dallas Police Department.
Yeah, well, when I saw the Dallas Mayor Eric Johnson he said, quote, you weren't doing everything possible to reduce violent crime. And then when he said that, I'm like, hold on, Black woman, law and order in a big city like that. Come on, it just didn't go together. I'm glad you broke that down now, because we're getting ready to wrap up. We're going to break this critical race theory down. So in my analysis of the whole critical race theory, because this is kind of it's a new term. My thing is, every 10, 15, 20 years, they just change the name of it, but it's all the same. And critical race theory, instead of the continuation of open or overt racism, Sister Renee Hall, Chief Hall, the white supremacist or oppressor controls the social, institutional, and economic dynamics in their favor. So this is pretty much, in my assessment, what critical race theory is all about. Is that yours? And then how can we fight through this mess?
So those are your words. So let me say my theory of critical race theory. I think we've lumped the education of African American history and critical race theory all in one big bowl. And they are two separate issues. And I think that what has to happen is that we have to make sure that we are not continuing to mix it, because our children in this community, both Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Arab, everyone needs to understand history. Because if you do not know where you come from, you may be destined to repeat it, because you're not sure what it is. And so what we have to understand is that the education of Black history is all there is. We are, and you talk about Black women, we are the mother of all mothers. It started with us. So if you are not talking about Black history, you have no history to talk about. We are the first people to ever walk the earth. God created Adam and Eve, they were Black. And so when we talk about, right, that, we have to, everything else comes from us. And so when we talk about our journey, whether it's through slavery, no, slavery is not pleasant to look at, to talk about, but Black people have to live it each and every day, because everything that we've done and everything that we've come from, and some of the things that still exist in our Black community today, come from where we started and what we were taught and what we learned, and what we have to unlearn. So I think not allowing our children, this next generation coming up, to be able to experience and understand what that actually looks like, is critical to who we are as a people. It's important for us to talk about, we started as slaves, but we ended up presidents of the United States and chiefs of police and governors. And, that's a journey. And we need to, as Black people, understand that journey. And white America needs to understand it as well. There is theory that white America doesn't want to teach it because it makes them feel bad. It makes us feel bad too, that we were slaves, but it's the truth. And the question is, are we not telling the truth because of how we feel? So those are the things that we have to understand, that critical race theory is a theory that puts racism at the premise of everything. And teaching about history is not about racism. Teaching about the history of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, W.E.B. Du Bois, that's not about racism. That is about the culture and the essence of Black people. And none of those things have anything to do with racism. So I think that we need to, and people need to fight. We talk about Black Lives Matter. Black lives have to matter when education is up front, when poverty is up front, when law enforcement is up front. It has to matter every day, or it doesn't matter at all. It has to matter when there are Black people being killed in communities every day by other Black people. There's a lot of issues that are on the table around us being Black, and we're not dealing with them as a whole. And I think this is an area where teachers and politicians and radio hosts and police chiefs, everyone needs to be saying that education is not an area where we can pick and choose, that we're not going to talk about Black people. And we can't afford to lump, racism and the education and history of Black people together so we don't have to teach it. And so, those are the things that's where I stand on it. And I think we have to make sure that this is a conversation moving forward, so that we don't have a generation or multiple generations of African American kids who don't know where they come from and how great and successful we have come from all the things that we have had to endure over hundreds and hundreds of years.
Now, Chief Hall, we only have about 60 seconds, but it's a lot of stuff I still didn't get to. So can you just give me just a couple of, I guess, words or points about these two, at least these two? I got like five that I didn't get to, but I got 2 points I want to make. I want to hear what you had to say about it. Defund the police. In short, defund the police? That's ridiculous.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous. When you talk about law enforcement and violent crime and gun crimes in the area, who's going to deal with them if you don't have police officers to deal with them? And I think right now we're experiencing an increase in violent crime in our communities, and you're expecting law enforcement to deal with them. But the politicians who have defunded, whether they were taking money out of my budget as a police chief in Dallas to take my overtime away, or whether you've taken money out of budgets in LA and Philadelphia, how are you going to police these communities? Even if the policing requires better community engagement, you got to have police to be able to engage the community. And if we've cut that, then we've done a disservice, and someone needs to come back to the table and uncut what we've cut.
Okay, coming up on a hard close right now, but mental health, I know that you understand the importance of that. And if you forget about defunding the police, but how about we reorchestrate the funding? And I'm sure your next city or whatever you're going to do as a police chief, you want to put some money in advocating into helping mental health as far as those that the police officers pull up on every day. A lot of cases are involve mental health. So that's important to you, right?
Absolutely. And I think I think what we do is we melt the two together, that you have to take away from the police in order to fund mental health. Mental health should be the priority of every city because there's so many individuals, especially during a pandemic. Dr. Fauci said that this was going to be as much of a health crisis, a mental health crisis, as it was a health crisis. And so we need to understand that there's a possibility that we are dealing with a large crisis, and there needs to be money to fund that in every city.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, y'all need to stand on up. If you're driving, please don't stand up. Keep your seatbelt on and just chill out. But if you are able to, stand up and put your hands together for the sister right here. Sister Police Chief Renee Hall. Well wishes to you on your way to the fellowship at Harvard. And then tell us real quick when can we look out for that book on you? We got to read that book.
You just stay tuned. I'll be at Harvard 2022, but just stay tuned because there's a story to tell.
All right. Chief, you take care. Be blessed. We love you.
Okay, thank you. Love you too. Bye.
All right. Thanks for hanging out with me today, cousin. We'll talk to you again on the next episode of Reggie's World. Until then, until we talk again, I want you listening, cousin, I want you to be blessed.
Reggie Reg, turn it up.
Our next program will come to you tomorrow morning.
Thank you for listening.